talk about?
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. The race to be the next Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister is still going on, with both candidates vying for last-minute votes. GB News has done some exclusive polling which shows that the British public prefer Keir Starmer to either Rishi or Liz. I'll be discussing this with former Conservative MP Jerry Hayes. I'll be speaking live to the former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to discuss the Prime Minister's legacy and the war 6 months on. And the typical household in Britain can expect their energy bills to rise to £3,549, coming amid a cost of living crisis, with prices soaring and taxes and interest rates going up. Just how bad could this get for households, and what should we be doing to help? I'll be discussing that with Harry Wilkinson from Net Zero Watch. And as always, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. But first, the news with Rihanna.
Thank you, Arlene. Good afternoon. It's 3:01. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Households struggling with the cost of living are now facing an 80% hike in their energy bills. Ofgem has announced the price cap will increase from just under £2,000 to over £3,500 in October. The government has acknowledged the rise will cause stress for many, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson says help is coming.
The pipeline of cash stretches out throughout the autumn. So there's going to be another £650 coming for every one of the 8 million most vulnerable households in October. In November, another £300 to help every pensioner, £150 extra for everybody who is entitled to disability benefits, on top of what we're doing with universal credit and the living wage, lifting both of those up.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says more focus needs to be on the energy companies and that they can do what they can do to alleviate the pain.
We need to have a freeze on those energy prices. Do not let them go up to those levels, and pay for that in part by a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies on those excess profits. Meanwhile, you've got a government that is missing in action, and I think most people looking in today would say that is unforgivable from the government in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
£500,000 in support has been announced for Liverpool following the shooting of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. A 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murdering the 9-year-old who was shot in her home on Monday night. Home Secretary Priti Patel says a package of measures will help both the community and police.
Today I am announcing additional support for the local community, and I've been speaking to the Mayor of Liverpool about this since Tuesday, and it's very specific in terms of community support that will cover a lot of the trauma support for local families, for local residents. I'm bringing forward £350,000, and that's on top of £10 million that's already coming to Merseyside. We call it GRIP funding, but it's funding that's targeted to deal with serious violence reduction. So that's getting weapons off the streets.
A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years and 4 months for the murder of Lily Sullivan in Pembroke in West Wales. Lewis Haynes was caught on CCTV with the teenager on the night she was killed just before Christmas last year. The 31-year-old strangled Lily after she rebuffed his advances and left her body in a reservoir. DCI Richard Yelland hopes the sentence will go some way in helping her family and friends rebuild their lives.
Lewis Haynes passed numerous opportunities to seek help when fleeing the scene of his crime. The life sentence handed down to Lewis Haynes today ensures that he will not be able to freely harm others in the community. Dyfed-Powys Police and our partnership will continue to work tirelessly to bring to justice those who perpetrate violence against women and girls in all its forms. This sentencing is no consolation for the family and friends of Lily, but I hope this will be a step forward in the slow process of rebuilding their lives.
The number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats this year has passed 24,000. Ministry of Defence figures show more than 800 migrants crossed in 16 small boats yesterday, the second busiest day of the year so far. That as the cost of the UK's asylum system topped £2 billion a year for the first time, following the highest number of claims in 2 decades. Over 900 people have been killed in Pakistan in floods that have affected more than 30 million people over the last few weeks. The country's climate minister has called it a humanitarian disaster of epic proportions and says the heavy rainfall is climate-induced. Pakistan's urging the international community to help with relief efforts as it struggles with the aftermath. And Royal Mail's chief executive has apologised to customers for a disrupted service following today's industrial action. More than 100,000 postal staff have walked off the job in a dispute over pay. It's the first of 4 days of strikes, with more being held on the 31st as well as next month on the 8th and 9th. The Communication Workers Union, which is demanding a pay rise that's more in line with inflation, says it's the biggest strike in the UK since 2009. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to the briefing with Arlene.
Welcome back to the briefing. The time is just 6 minutes after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, GB News has commissioned some official polling conducted by the group People Polling, with a pool of 1,235 members of the public who are not exclusively GB News viewers. The GB News People's Poll finds the majority of British people would prefer a Labour government with Keir Starmer at the helm rather than a Conservative government under Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. It comes as Labour currently holds a 14% lead over the Tories in the polls. The findings conducted by People Polling also discovered that the word that comes to mind the most about the frontrunner in the Tory leadership, Liz Truss, is untrustworthy. Well, let's now speak to former Conservative MP and barrister Gerry Hayes. Good afternoon, Gerry. Well, I don't know whether you heard all of that, but there's certainly plenty to take on board there, isn't there?
Well, and of course, we've given it into the hands of the membership, and the membership of the main political parties tend to be more extreme than the people who vote Conservative. What people need to do is to think, who's going to win us the general election? Not settle a score with Rishi Sunak because he allegedly stabbed the Prime Minister in the back. He didn't. He stabbed him in the front. The trouble with Liz Truss, she won't be as bad as Boris Johnson, of course not, but she's just not very good. Has she been to the province yet?
She has, yes, been to the province. She was over at the hustings, I think, about a week and a half ago she was over.
Yeah, how did she go down? Because, I mean, one thing, I was in the Northern Ireland office for 3 very happy years, and one lesson I learned was you don't cross the DUP and get away with it, because you guys are the toughest negotiators known to man or woman.
Well, that's I'll take that as a compliment, I think, Gerry. But she was there for the Tory hustings, as you can imagine. There are not too many Conservative members in Northern Ireland, but I think there were around 200 at the hustings. And I think they did, both she and Rishi also did some visits when they were in Belfast. So I presume by what you've said, you would be a Rishi backer rather than a Liz backer at this point in time.
Well, yes. In fact, I was a backer of Kemi Badenoch, who's a friend, and she's, to my mind, a breath of fresh air. She's got new ideas. She's untainted by the Johnson government. And the trouble is, it's interesting to see how many people will spoil their ballots. How many people will say, we want Boris? And then there's dear old Boris Johnson in the background, like every former leader of a major political party. They all think that one day that phone is going to ring and people are going to beg for them to come back. Well, they're not. And the fact is, I suspect we are going to be landed with Liz Truss, who's not naturally spontaneous. She's got an awful lot of issues to deal with, the energy crisis, and she's offering tax cuts. I served under Margaret Thatcher. And the thing is, she would never offer tax cuts which are unfunded. She never would do it. In fact, in the 1981 budget, because inflation was so bad, what she did was she raised taxes by £4 billion and put a windfall tax on the energy companies. And of course, the reason she did that was because Ted Heath, in his dash for growth, he did a massive U-turn. He said, right, let's get rid of the regulations, let's cut taxes. And of course, inflation went through the roof and he lost the election. So I would support Rishi simply because he may not be exciting, but he's competent.
Yeah. And I just want to put on record that this is one party leader that's not waiting on the phone call to go back into office, just to be clear.
They always do.
Well, I think a lot of people in the country through the membership, and this is something that you can comment on because, of course, you were there as an MP for quite a while, Jerry. A lot of the membership didn't want Boris to go. And do you think that will be reflected in the poll? Do you think they will go down the line of spoiling their ballot papers?
Oh, I think a lot of people will. The irony of the situation, if enough do it, it will mean that Rishi Sunak could beat Liz Truss. And a lot of people, particularly the sort of peculiars who support Boris and now Liz Truss, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, I imagine he would go down well in the province, and Nadine Dorris, they're character assassination of him. And I think a lot of party members want to punish Rishi Sunak, not thinking politically at all, which is a very great shame because I don't want Keir Starmer to win the next election. I really don't. But we're going to give it to him on a plate if you have Liz Truss as our leader. Sad.
Yeah, and finally, just before you go, Jerry, I mentioned the fact that you are a criminal barrister in the introduction. We've seen recently that barristers criminal law barristers have voted overwhelmingly to go on strike. Now, for people who don't understand how barristers get paid, they will say, my goodness, barristers get paid very well. Why do they need to go on strike? But we're talking here about criminal barristers who get paid by the Legal Aid Board. So that's a different scenario than getting privately paid. Could you maybe give us a little bit of an insight into that before you go?
I can do it in a paragraph. When I started this job 45 years ago, there were 6,000 criminal specialists. There are now 2,300, and it's going down. And the reason it's going down, our pay has been decreased, our fees by 28% since 2016. Before that, 50%. So people are saying, what is the point? You've got junior barristers who have got the most amazing qualifications, far better than I ever had. And what's happening to them? They're getting below the minimum wage. We were promised a deal by the government, by Dominic Raab, and we were promised that we were going to be paid properly, that £130 million was going to go into the system. Because in a few years' time, people say, what's happened to the criminal barristers? Why can't I get proper representation? And I'll tell you, because this government has underfunded barristers and underfunded the system, and the system has fallen apart.
Yeah, Jerry, and I mean, I think people have a misconception about barristers and lawyers in general, especially those that are paid from the public purse. So that's why I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to that. So thanks for coming on, Jerry, and hopefully see you again soon. Okay. GB News has learned that a massive 60% of those currently arriving across the channel in small boats are from Albania, a tiny nation of less than 3 million people. An emergency agreement between the UK and Albania will come into force next week, aiming to rapidly remove those Albanians who arrive by small boat and who the government believes have no right to be here. As our Home and Security editor Mark White reports, those Albanians who enter the UK illegally could be on a deportation flight home within a few weeks of arrival here.
Arriving into Dover Harbour, the Border Force vessel Ranger, her decks packed with Channel migrants. most likely to be from Albania. In fact, we can confirm that 60% of those currently arriving into UK waters on small boats are from that tiny nation. In truth, this is a crisis within a crisis, which has so concerned UK authorities, it resulted in what amounts to an emergency agreement between the UK and Albanian governments to rapidly remove those with no right to asylum. The British government believes that's likely to be the vast majority of those arriving from what is a peaceful nation on the Balkan Peninsula. We've been told that 6 in 10 of those arriving on small boats at the moment are from Albania, more than 6,000 already this year and growing rapidly. Compare that to just 2 years ago, when only 50 Albanians arrived by small boat. Here in the Albanian capital, Tirana, this is also an existential crisis for those in government here, as the country faces rapid depopulation. Since the 90s, the population has fallen by more than 15% and now numbers fewer than 2.8 million people. The crisis is most acute in Albania's rural towns and villages, where the vast majority of their young have up sticks and left. In fact, Albania is one of the few nations in the world where there are more of its people living outside than inside the country. As part of the agreement with the UK, Albanian law enforcement officials will be seconded here to the Border Force processing centres at Dover Harbour and the former RAF base at Manston. We're told they'll help gather intelligence on arrivals and quickly assess those with no right to be here. Officials hope those individuals could be removed within 2 or 3 weeks of arriving. However, there's little doubt asylum lawyers will try to challenge those decisions. Nothing surrounding this growing crisis is ever straightforward. Mark White, GB News.
So coming up, I'll be discussing the rising energy price cap with Harry Wilkinson from Net Zero Watch. But before that, let's take a short break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain, Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back to the briefing. And before we go to speak to Harry Wilkinson about the energy price cap, we're going to go to Ukraine. And the Prime Minister has been back in Ukraine this week for the third time since the conflict started. On Wednesday, he was greeted by President Zelensky in Kyiv for Ukraine's Independence Day. The visit comes in the final weeks of the Prime Minister's time in office and has been seen as an opportunity to cement his legacy standing up to Russia. Well, I'm very delighted to say now that joining me is the former President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Poroshenko. First of all, Wednesday, of course, was Independence Day for Ukraine, and it's always an important day in Ukraine, but now it was celebrated across the Western world. How important was it to have that day of independence?
This is the extremely important position for any nation, but Ukraine maybe paid the highest price in the world for our independence. And we moving ahead and protecting not only our sovereignty, but not only our territorial integrity, but also the freedom and democracy. But for being absolutely clear, this is the war not only against Ukraine. This is the war against the whole Western world, against the whole Western values. And I very much appreciate the unique transatlantic unity which our partners demonstrate. And first of all, I want to thank and recognize the great leadership of your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, of the US President, Joe Biden. I can call them as my real friend and real friend of Ukraine. And with that situation, I think that we definitely demonstrate the great surprise for Putin and great surprise for the world by stopping the Russian troops, by changing game, and by returning back Putin to the Russia from Ukraine and so on.
And Mr. Poroshenko, as you well know, the Prime Minister will only be the Prime Minister for another week and a half, and then there'll be a new Prime Minister in place. Are you concerned about that commitment to Ukraine, or are you content that whoever becomes Prime Minister of the United Kingdom will continue with that very strong support for the position of Ukraine as an independent nation?
First of all, I want to thank all the British people for absolutely unique support of Ukraine. And Ukraine could be proud of this support. And this is the beyond the partisan approach. And with this situation, I think that the significant role in our future victory playing United Kingdom. And I have no doubt that any next Prime Minister, despite of the fact that they say that it's already almost known the future candidate. I know her, and we keep fingers crossed, but without any doubts, any next Prime Minister would be together with Ukraine, because United Kingdom is a democracy, and the will of the people is absolutely decisive. And we demonstrate in Ukraine that Ukraine is united, and all politicians is united to protect Ukraine, and all Great Britain people is united in support of Ukraine. With that situation, I am quite optimistic.
And Mr. Poroshenko, obviously we're facing into winter now. That brings its own challenges for everything that's happening in your country. Back here, we're facing an energy crisis, a cost of living crisis. Are you concerned that those sorts of pressures on people back here in the UK will have an influence on support for what you have rightly described as very solid support from the UK? Do you think that they may grow weary given the cost of living crisis is going to have a huge impact back here?
Definitely, the energy crisis is important, but because of the fact that Putin using the energy as a weapon against the whole free world. Financial crisis is important, but because Putin using economy against the all free world. But please consider the participation in protecting world from the Putin's aggression. This is the top priority, and the real danger in the world is the Putinism, and that's why we need to deputinize Europe, to deputinize Russia, to save the world. And please consider that this is the fact that you are not assisting Ukraine, but you investing in your own security. And I think that the British people are among the best in the world who understand and deliver this information to all other member states, because if we do not stop Putin in Ukraine, we need to stop him in Poland, in Baltic states, who knows, maybe tomorrow in Alaska. Please help us to save the world. Help us to help you.
Well, I must say we're much obliged for you coming on this afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us live from Kiev and for your clarity in your answers as well. Thank you so much. Well, sobering news this morning, I've already referred to it in relation to the cost of living crisis and the fact that there's a new energy price cap which Ofgem has announced, and that will increase from the current 1,971 to 3,549 for the mainland here from October the 1st. The industry regulator has told households to brace for those higher bills this autumn and winter, while imploring the next Prime Minister to take urgent action. Well, I'm joined now by Harry Wilkinson from Net Zero Watch, a great friend of the GB News channel. Harry, thank you for joining us. You heard Mr. Poroshenko there live from Kiev talking about the fact that we are investing not just in the security of Ukraine, but actually the security of the world by our intervention in Ukraine. But I think we are concerned very much about security of supply, and it's something that wasn't talked about. We should have been talking about it, shouldn't we?
That's right. Thank you, Arlene. I think this is an important issue that we've just seen beforehand to place in context of the energy crisis. We know that Russia's actions have clearly played a big role in the high prices that we're seeing. But there's also hope in the fact that we can actually do many things to actually get prices down. But also, what's frustrating is the government isn't taking these relatively straightforward measures to get the cost of energy down. For example, we could get rid of the emissions trading scheme, which puts a carbon tax on a big proportion of our electricity generation. The government's own figures suggest that that adds £35 per megawatt hour to the cost of electricity. So that's a cost that we could do away with straight away. We could transfer as well the green energy levies to from people's bills to general taxation, and that would protect a lot of the people who are most vulnerable and most likely to really suffer from these shocking and quite terrible price rises. We need a comprehensive package, I think, that actually deals with the fundamentals of why energy prices are so high. We made a big mistake by ignoring the importance of fossil fuels to our energy system for too long. Net zero made the story all about renewables when actually they weren't in a position to cope with meeting all our energy needs that we have at the moment. So we've done things like have a fracking ban. We have all this shale gas under our feet that we've sat on. The Dutch have one of the biggest gas fields in the world under their feet, the Groningen gas field that's being phased out. Many fossil fuel projects haven't gone forward thanks to the net zero agenda. So this is a problem that's largely of our own making, but that means we can get out of it as well with the right leadership, I think we can see a change of direction that prioritises affordability and getting the cost of living down. That has to be the priority right now.
And I noticed that earlier on today you were tweeting about the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, and his commitment to rein in the profits of the renewable energy companies. I mean, how is he going to do that, Harry? How do you think that will work in practice?
Well, one of the biggest windfalls that we're seeing at the present moment is actually going to the renewable energy generators. Many of the renewables that we're seeing, the majority of them at the moment, were opted in under the old subsidy scheme called the Renewables Obligation. So what we're seeing is the huge prices we're seeing for electricity now. They're getting those wholesale prices and they're getting huge subsidies on top of that. It's quite outrageous that even though they're making huge profits, we're giving them a subsidy on top of that. So that can be changed quite quickly. The value of the renewable obligation certificates is set in legislation. That could be cut to zero, if necessary, tomorrow. And that would reduce another big burden off of people's bills. So I think the business secretary needs to think ambitiously here. He needs to be bold. He needs to take big measures because the crisis that people are about to suffer is of staggering proportions. And so he needs to take these big actions that may upset some people. The renewables lobby will be noisy and they won't take kindly to having these valuable subsidies taken away. But we have to do this to deal with the crisis.
And presumably they will argue, Harry, that they have a legitimate expectation over a period of years to that renewable obligation, and that's what they will argue. But just finally, Harry, we've talked about this before. What role does energy efficiency have in all of this conversation that we're having?
Well, energy efficiency is hard to get right in this country. We have a situation where many botched energy efficiency schemes have left people without adequate ventilation. They've had problems with mold. They've had all sorts of issues because we have a temperate climate, relatively mild overall. We don't have the same conditions as many people in Europe. So it's hard to really get energy efficiency right in this country. But that's not to say we shouldn't be ambitious in terms of not wasting energy. We want to get people's bills down, and energy efficiency can be a part of that. But it's something that will take many years. It's not going to provide that relief to the whole population now that we need to see. So that's something for the long term to be looking at, but it's not going to do those immediate savings. But I think what people can do now as private households is just to look at their own consumption. People will be forced to do this, I think. Unfortunately, they're going to have to think about what's the minimum amount of energy they can use and still sort of get by.
Indeed, Harry, as my late father would have said, this house is like a Christmas tree. It's time to turn the lights off. But in any event, thank you for joining us this afternoon, Harry, and giving us your expertise. Thank you. Well, coming up, we'll be heading to Scotland, where the streets of Edinburgh are overflowing with rubbish. But where is Nicola Sturgeon? But first, it's your news update.
It's coming up to 3:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. As we've been hearing, energy bills will rise by more than 80% from October, with Ofgem announcing the price cap will increase from just under £2,000 to over £3,500. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government has a plan to help struggling households over the coming months.
The pipeline of cash stretches out throughout the autumn. So there's going to be another £650 coming for every one of the 8 million most vulnerable households in October. In November, another £300 to help every pensioner, £150 extra for everybody who is entitled to disability benefits, on top of what we're doing with universal credit and the living wage, lifting both of those up.
£500,000 in support has been announced following the shooting of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. Home Secretary Priti Patel, who visited the scene earlier, says a package of measures will help both the community and police. And Royal Mail's chief executive has apologised to customers for a disrupted service following today's industrial action. More than 100,000 postal staff have walked off the job in a dispute over wages. The Communication Workers Union, which is demanding a pay rise that's more in line with inflation, says it's the biggest strike in the UK since 2009. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.185 and €1.179. The price of gold currently stands at £1,475.70 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing, and it's just coming up to 38 minutes past 3. Nicola Sturgeon has been accused of favouring foreign trips and book festival appearances over resolving an ongoing industrial dispute that has led to rubbish piled high on the street of Scotland's major cities. Talks are resuming today to resolve the strikes that have left bins overflowing and piles of food waste accumulating in Edinburgh, where crowds have gathered for the August festivals. Joining me now is Scottish Conservative MSP Jeremy Balfour. Well, Jeremy, not a very pleasant sight in Edinburgh, and the First Minister is currently out of the country.
Yeah, she's completely abdicated any responsibility for this strike. She's not engaged with the local authority, she's not engaged with the trade unions, and has left it for others to take the blame. And we are seeing a health crisis starting to emerge here in Edinburgh. The bins haven't been collected. They're all over the street. We have an international festival going on, and she has simply walked away from the scene.
Tweet from someone saying, surely Nicola Sturgeon doesn't have the right to set up an embassy, but of course she's not setting up an embassy. It's just a Scottish Government office, as I understand it, and that's where she is at present.
And that's right, she is doing that. But what she should be back in Edinburgh negotiating a deal with the local authority. The local authority can only increase that pay deal if the Scottish Government give them more money. That's where the money comes from, and there's simply been no movement in regard to that from Scottish Government. And we're now seeing it going beyond Edinburgh. We're seeing other local authorities being affected, and this is going to just affect every individual's life. And it's time that this government got a grip of it.
And of course, there's been reports of people, not just, this is an urban area. It will go out, obviously, to other areas now, as you've rightly said. I think it's spreading to other councils right across Scotland. But in an urban setting, it's much more difficult to deal with rubbish. And there's been reports of people keeping rubbish in their baths to try and control any leaks that come out from it. This is really not on in modern Scotland today, is it, Jeremy?
Well, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, you've got to remember, we're just coming towards the end of the international festival. We've got people from across the world coming here, and the image they're going to go away with is simply rubbish on the streets. We've got a crisis where we could end up with health issues appearing, and why have the Scottish Government taken so long to do anything about this? They should have seen this was coming. They've got to provide the money for the local authority to then do something with it. However, the local authority need to be doing something at this time as well. I don't quite understand in regard to the health issues around the city centre, why they are not using private business to be picking up this rubbish. So the blame lies at Scottish Government, but also the Labour-led local authority need to be doing more as well. You've got to remember that down in England, the refuse collectors have been offered 10.5%. That is almost double what we've been offered here in Scotland. And I think it just shows you the lack of value the Scottish Government put on local authority and people that work for the local authority.
And you've mentioned there using the private sector to help clean up the streets of Scotland. Is that a starter at all, Jeremy, to bring in the private sector to try and help clean these streets? Because this is the capital city of Scotland we're talking about here.
Absolutely. I mean, it's happened in the past. It could happen if the local authority decide to do that. There are private contractors collecting rubbish in the city. At the moment, I saw that with my own eyes today. They could be asked to come, even from a health crisis perspective, so that we don't end up with lots of rats and other animals on the street. We're seeing an increase in foxes in more suburbs of the city. So we do need to see action taken by the Labour Council here in Edinburgh. And they should be getting these private contractors in to at least clear the stuff in the city centre so there's no health crisis.
Well, Jeremy, thank you for joining us from Edinburgh. It looks like you're in the Parliament buildings itself there, and I wish you well for the rest of the day. Thanks for joining us, Jeremy. Well, earlier in the programme, we spoke to the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, on Boris Johnson's legacy in the country. And I'm now going to speak to Stuart Crawford. He's a defence analyst and former British Army officer. Stuart, thank you for joining me. You're also in Edinburgh at the moment, Stuart. I mean, as a citizen there, surely you must reflect on what's going on in Edinburgh as well before we move on to Ukraine.
Yes, indeed, Arlene. I was in Edinburgh about 2 or 3 days after the strike had started, and the rubbish was already beginning to build up. And it's a great shame, actually, because in many ways Edinburgh is Scotland's showcase as our capital city, and the festival is the biggest festival in the world of its kind. And it was very disappointing to hear some of the visitors from elsewhere just remarking on what an absolute tip the streets were. Just in passing, I remember when I was much younger, there was the Glasgow bin strike, and I was in my late teens, I think, and eventually the army was called in to deal with it. And I have asked the question whether the Scottish Government will ask the army to come in and do the same this time. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens, I think.
Well, I think there's probably more chance of the army being invited in than the private sector being invited in, perhaps by the SNP, sure. But let's go back to Ukraine, and I don't know whether you had the chance to listen to former President Poroshenko, but he was being very clear about the need for support continuing from the UK and the US for Ukraine, despite the fact that we do have this cost of living crisis coming, energy prices rising. And he was saying support must continue because Ukraine is standing for freedom across the world. Did you hear what he had to say?
I didn't hear that, but from your praise of it, I would absolutely agree. The UK has been a very good friend of Ukraine in terms of support. I think in terms of bilateral military supplies, we have only come second to the USA in absolute terms. I think we've somewhere about the region of £2.5 billion worth of aid, and that doesn't include training Ukrainian soldiers in the UK. And the USA has actually made about 4 times that, around about 10 billion so far. It's very difficult to keep up with the figures. But if you look at it in relative terms as percentage of GDP, which countries are committing to support Ukraine, the UK is only 6th. And the USA is 7th in the list. And perhaps not surprisingly, those sending the most are the Baltic states, Poland, and believe it or not, Norway. So maintaining that support is extremely important for Ukraine and also for the whole of the West. And I hope that the next Prime Minister, whoever she may be, will continue what Boris Johnson has done so successfully.
And Stuart, you will have heard President Zelensky talk about the nuclear plant where the Russians, as I understand it, are occupying the nuclear plant. They disconnected from Ukraine's power grid. And he's saying that we were minutes away from a nuclear disaster. What's your take on what's happening in relation to the nuclear plants in Ukraine?
This is the plant at Zaporizhzhia, I think it is. Excuse my pronunciation. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the critical thing about the nuclear plant is obviously it creates electricity, but the nuclear reactors need to be cooled by circulation of water. And by disconnecting the nuclear power station from the grid, it was necessary for the backup systems to kick in. And so, and I think, there's a direct backup system from a nearby thermal power station, and then I suspect there'll also be another backup system using generators, diesel generators, etc., etc. But there's no doubt that it's anything to do with disrupting that sort of operation is risky, and it doesn't help the fact that the Russians appear to be using the plant as a whole as a sort of safe haven for military equipment, and I've seen the satellite pictures. So I think we have to be very careful about what goes on at that nuclear plant and be ready to well, by whatever means necessary, persuade both Russia and Ukraine to make sure that it's safe.
But of course, power plants are one thing. Should we be concerned also about the tactical use of nuclear weapons, Stuart? Is that something that we in the UK should be worried about?
One can never say never. But my take on it would be that if the Russians were tempted to use tactical nuclear weapons, of which they have, I think, about 1,500, then it would definitely lead to escalation and might lead towards direct intervention by the USA and NATO. I think Russia's got little to gain and a lot to lose if it does deploy tactical nuclear weapons. So personally, I'm not too worried about it. But again, it's one of these things you always have to keep your eye on, just in case things begin to go wrong.
Obviously, the Prime Minister here is moving on. He's been a huge friend of the Ukrainian president. He made his 3rd visit and has been given the Order of, I think it's the Order of Liberty, when he visited on Wednesday. Do you think it will have an impact on the morale of the Ukrainians, given that Boris Johnson is moving on and has been such a visible support to President Zelensky?
Yes, I think we can. We can criticise Boris Johnson for lots of things, but in terms of his policy towards the Ukraine, I think he's got it absolutely spot on, and I think he is rightly admired by the Ukrainians for doing that. Now, they will be hoping beyond hope that our next Prime Minister, whoever she may be, continues with that level of support and is an equally visible supporter of Ukraine and leader of the West in terms of continuing that support.
Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. And we're going to move on now to talk about, yes, we haven't talked about it for a while, the Northern Ireland Protocol. Moving on, the Chancellor is being urged to act to prevent the 25% tariff on steel products entering Northern Ireland from mainland Britain. The tariff is being introduced as a result of the Northern Ireland Protocol after EU quotas for global imports were exhausted. Well, joining me now is DUP MLA Gordon Lyons and Minister for the Economy in Northern Ireland. Gordon, thank you for joining me. Before we talk about steel tariffs, you had a meeting with the Chancellor today in relation to the £400 of help going to each of the citizens of the UK. Tell us about that.
Yes, and good afternoon, Arlene. It's good to be with you. I had a meeting today with the Chancellor and with the Business Secretary around the £400 energy support payments that every household in the UK is getting. There was a little bit of a delay in sorting that out in relation to Northern Ireland, but I'm delighted that the Chancellor has done what he said he would do and done what he has done in the rest of the UK, which is do this on a UK-wide basis rather than having to go through the Northern Ireland government department. So that means it can get out quicker and much easier to people here in Northern Ireland. I also said to the Chancellor, though, that we're going to face a really difficult winter, and the £400 payment, while welcome, is not going to be enough. And I received an assurance from him that whoever wins the Conservative leadership campaign recognises the need to take further action. So I do expect there to be further announcements for the whole of the UK next month.
Well, let's go to that story around steel then, Gordon. The Northern Ireland Protocol, viewers and listeners will know about that. They will know that there's checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland because of the protocol. Why has there now been a 25% tariff put on steel moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland?
Well, again, it's a decision of the European Commission. We used to have our own quota in the UK for steel, but instead we're now going to be lumped in with the rest of the world, and that quota has been used up. That means we now find ourselves in the position that steel moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, steel moving from one part of the UK to another, will now have a tariff of 25% added. So we've some people out there that are saying the protocol is a great thing and it's wonderful, but if you're trying to build a hospital, trying to build a school, trying to build homes, that's an extra 25% that you're going to have to pay. It's just another reason why the protocol needs to be sorted out once and for all. This has dragged on for far too long. You know that we've been warning about this for many, many years, about the impact that it's going to have. And yesterday's announcement is yet again another reason why it needs to be sorted out.
But it's the practical on-the-ground issues, I think, that some people don't really take into consideration, because this is 25% on steel. Therefore, all of the manufacturing that comes from that will have to pass that on. And that just makes business industry in Northern Ireland totally uncompetitive. Isn't that right?
Well, it's absolutely the case. It's adding that additional cost. Of course, if people in Northern Ireland decided to buy steel from elsewhere in the world rather than in the UK, that will then have an impact on UK jobs, UK investment, and their ability to sell goods into Northern Ireland. So it's that double whammy. It's bad for Great Britain and it's bad for Northern Ireland as well. And all of this is down to the protocol. Of course, it's not the first time that businesses in Great Britain and consumers in Northern Ireland are having these problems. You only need to look at some of the other businesses that have been affected. Some suppliers in Great Britain have said, you know what, it's just not worth our time to sell goods into Northern Ireland. It's extra paperwork, extra checks, extra hassle in case we get it wrong. And that's what's led to a huge diversion of trade, where goods from Great Britain aren't being sold into Northern Ireland, so consumers in Northern Ireland have to look elsewhere. And that comes at extra cost to consumers as well. That's why this needs to be sorted out, and it needs to be taken seriously. The EU Commission haven't fully recognised the issues, the concerns and the problems that exist. But the UK government at least are starting to take action via the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. And this example around steel is yet another example of why, for the good of people in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, this issue needs to be sorted out.
And just finally, Gordon, can I ask you about reports, I think from the Financial Times this week, that if Liz Truss becomes the next Prime Minister, she may well trigger Article 16. You've just talked about trade diversion, and of course trade diversion is one of the reasons why you have the power to trigger Article 16. Would you welcome the triggering of Article 16 if she was to do that?
Well, yes, I've been calling for the triggering of Article 16 for some time because I think the conditions have been met. The withdrawal agreement and the protocol itself set out that there are certain circumstances under which Article 16, parts of the protocol to be disapplied, can be invoked if there are societal difficulties, if there are economic difficulties, or if there is diversion of trade. And in all of those measures, I think that we very clearly have reason to invoke Article 16. Look, that will help in some way, but ultimately we need the longer term solution. Article 16 can help in the short to medium term, but ultimately we will need that longer term solution, and that's why the protocol bill is needed. Look, if we can get negotiation between the UK and the EU, that's great. We would welcome that. We haven't seen much sign yet from the UK government and the EU that's going to happen.
Well, Gordon, thank you for joining me this afternoon. That's Gordon Lyons, the Economy Minister in Northern Ireland. And that's the end of the show. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The show's back every Friday from 3 p.m. Up next, it's Calvin Robinson, who's in for Nana Aquia. We'll see you next week.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. A bank holiday weekend for much of the UK, and most places are going to have a dry 3 days with sunny spells as well. Feeling quite pleasant in the sunny spells as well, certainly on Saturday and Sunday. There's high pressure nearby and it will be building in for the weekend, but for the time being we do have this old weather front that's providing quite a few showers out there through this evening over parts of Wales and southern Scotland, one or two heavy ones over southwest Scotland, tending to ease off as we go through the evening and overnight. Most of us will have a dry night with clear spells. Could just turn a little misty once more across East Anglia in the southeast, one or two fog patches here. Still quite warm here, but elsewhere a reasonably comfortable night, and certainly across the northwest, temperatures well down into single figures in rural areas. So a coolish start here, but generally a sunny start. Most places having a fine, bright day on Saturday. Not everywhere dry. There will still be one or two showers scattered across northern England.